The room went quiet the moment the billionaire smiled. Danielle stood steady with her notepad, calm and professional, when he switched languages on purpose. Slow, exaggerated, performed just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Glasses stopped clinking. A few people laughed. Most didn't. But no one spoke. Power sat comfortably at the table. Humiliation stood on the floor. Then he leaned back and said, clear and sharp, "Do you even understand this? Or should I use smaller words for you?" Eyes dropped. Breaths tightened. Danielle didn't move. What he thought was a clever joke was actually a mistake, one he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Danielle had learned how to stay composed in rooms that were never built with her in mind. Every shift looked the same on the surface-pressed uniform, calm voice, steady hands. But there was always a quiet tension beneath it. This restaurant sold itself as elite and cultured, a place where refinement mattered. In practice, it ran on money and hierarchy. Respect followed wealth, not effort. Danielle Carter moved through the dining room with discipline, never rushing, never hesitating. She understood how easily confidence could be misread, how quickly calm could be labeled attitude. Her professionalism was armor, carefully worn in a space where assumptions formed faster than facts. When Richard arrived, the air adjusted around him. He didn't raise his voice or ask for attention. It came automatically. Chairs shifted. Servers recalibrated. Conversations bent in his direction without anyone noticing. Lauren Holloway followed a step behind, polished and observant, her expression composed but alert. She noticed the small things, the looks, the pauses, but rarely interrupted the flow. From the edge of the room, Gregory watched. Gregory Miles knew which tables mattered and which didn't. His priority was always the same: keep things smooth, protect the image, avoid scenes. Problems weren't solved here. They were managed, especially when the money looked expensive. In the kitchen, Louis paused longer than necessary before sending out plates. Louis Bernard had seen this pattern before, the testing disguised as humor, the jokes that landed unevenly. He didn't step in, but his eyes followed Danielle longer than usual, a quiet recognition passing between them. Danielle felt the pressure settle, not as fear, but as awareness. Power had a way of entertaining itself. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Henry, her father, her reason for standing tall on nights like this. Henry Carter had taught her how to endure without losing dignity, how to remain steady when respect wasn't freely given. She straightened, focused, ready to take the order and move on. But nothing about this table felt temporary. The restaurant hummed with low laughter and soft music, silverware tapping against plates. Beneath it all was something sharper. The rules were clear, the balance was tilted, and whatever was beginning here wasn't going to pass quietly. Some nights ended with clear tables and signed checks. This one was building towards something else. Danielle returned to the table with the same measured calm, even as the mood thickened around her. She aligned the glasses, adjusted the plates, and waited without filling the silence. The performance had sharpened. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was deliberate, about reminding someone where they stood. Richard Holloway leaned back, comfortable in the attention he created, aware that the room was listening whether it wanted to or not. He repeated the foreign phrases again, slower, savoring the sound. Not because the order required it, but because the moment did. This wasn't about food. It was about display. Danielle Carter recognized it instantly and kept her face neutral. She wrote, nodded once, and held her posture steady. "Relax," he said with a casual wave. "I just assumed this place hired people who could keep up." The words landed lightly, but the meaning pressed down. Nearby conversations thinned. A fork paused midair. Danielle moved on without reacting, professionalism intact, as if composure alone could deflect what was coming. Lauren Holloway watched from beside him, her smile tightening. She noticed the room's shift, the lowered voices, the careful glances, but comfort kept her still. Comfort had a way of quieting conscience, especially when speaking up might cost you your seat at the table. From across the room, Gregory Miles adjusted his jacket and took a step forward, then stopped. He knew this pattern. Wealth testing boundaries, staff absorbing it. His job, as he understood it, was to keep the machine running. "Just make sure he's happy," Gregory said quietly as Danielle passed. "That's all that matters tonight." The message wasn't subtle. Silence over dignity. Containment over fairness. Back at the table, the testing escalated. Richard leaned forward now, voice lowered just enough to force proximity. He corrected her pronunciation of a word she hadn't mispronounced, interrupted her mid-sentence, and smirked when she paused. Each moment stacked on the last, pressure building without a raised voice. "You know," he said, glancing at the menu, "some words don't translate well, especially for people who aren't trained." A few people chuckled, not loudly. Enough to register, enough to sting. Danielle felt the shift from discomfort to anger controlled, contained. Near the kitchen, Louis Bernard met her eyes and held them for a beat longer than necessary. It wasn't intervention, but it was acknowledgement. The night tightened. Richard asked her to repeat herself, then cut her off. He watched her hands too closely, corrected nothing that needed correcting, and enjoyed the room's compliance. Gregory hovered nearby, pretending to check another table while listening. He saw phones lowered, glances exchanged, and still didn't step in. Danielle placed the final dish down and straightened. The humiliation had turned public. She turned away under the weight of eyes she couldn't meet. Then it crossed a line it couldn't return from. Richard waved the check early and followed her movements with pointed attention when she returned to process the payment. "Make sure you don't mix anything up," he said loudly. "Mistakes happen when people get overwhelmed." Danielle had heard versions of that line before. This time, it felt less like a warning and more like a trap being set. When the receipt came back and the card wasn't immediately visible, Richard stood, voice rising. "Where is it?" The room froze. Judgment pressed in, heavier than any word spoken. Gregory stepped forward, pale, instinctively reaching to contain the moment rather than correct it. Lauren stood as well, eyes wide now, the implication finally landing. From the kitchen, Louis took a step and stopped himself, fists clenched. Danielle didn't defend herself yet. She stood still, letting the accusation hang where everyone could see it. For a moment, it felt like the room itself had turned against her. Then, a calm, unfamiliar voice cut through the noise. "That won't be necessary." Charles Whitmore had entered without announcement. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority followed him naturally, pulling attention away from the chaos like gravity. The balance hadn't shifted yet, but the surface was cracking. The accusation didn't explode. It spread. It moved through the room quietly, carried by distance and doubt, by people stepping back instead of stepping in. Danielle stood where she was, shoulders square, hands visible. Danielle Carter had learned long ago that panic only feeds the story others are eager to tell. Stillness, sometimes, was the only defense left. Richard Holloway mistook that stillness for surrender. His confidence sharpened as the silence held. He had money, momentum, and a room trained to believe him. "Don't just stand there!" She was the last one who touched it. The words landed and stuck. Eyes turned. Space opened around Danielle as if suspicion needed room to breathe. Gregory Miles stepped forward on instinct, already calculating risk. He didn't look at her. He looked at the scene and how fast things were slipping toward spectacle. "We'll handle this quietly and follow protocol. Containment over correction. Order over justice." Lauren Holloway felt the shift the moment it crossed from humiliation into accusation. The performance had curdled. She stood, the scrape of her chair loud in the hush. "This isn't okay." The words hung there, thin but undeniable. Richard didn't answer her. He didn't need to yet. The system was still leaning his way. Near the kitchen, Louis Bernard took a half step forward and stopped, his hands clenched, courage stalled by consequence. Phones that had been lowered earlier now hovered at chest level. The room wasn't neutral anymore. It was deciding. For a moment, it felt like the night would end the way these nights often did. Quietly, wrongly, with damage no one would claim. Danielle thought of Henry Carter then, of the steadiness he taught her when the world tilted, of dignity as something you keep even when everything else is stripped away. Then the air changed. Charles Whitmore stepped into the open space without raising his voice or his pace. He hadn't rushed. He had watched the pattern form, the accusation bloom, the silence settle. Authority rearranged itself around him without permission. "That won't be necessary." The sentence stopped movement. It stopped breath. Charles Whitmore looked at the receipt, the table, the faces already choosing sides. He took in the confidence that came from being believed by default and the calm that came from refusing to bend. The truth surfaced in pieces. A pocket check too late. A card sitting exactly where it had always been. Timelines that didn't add up once someone bothered to look. The accusation began to sag under its own weight. Whispers shifted direction. Phones lifted higher. Richard felt it then, the reversal, the heat in his face, the loss of air. His posture tightened as certainty collapsed into calculation. He tried to speak over it, but the room no longer answered. Charles named what had happened plainly and publicly. He referenced policies designed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. He made it clear whose reputation was at risk and whose wasn't. Gregory stepped back, understanding too late that the machine he protected had turned. Lewis moved closer to Danielle, not touching, just present. Richard's confidence drained. His shoulders drew in. When he spoke again, the ease was gone, replaced by a brittle edge that fooled no one. "Apologize!" The word landed like a verdict. The moment stretched long enough for everyone to see who Richard was when power failed him. The apology that followed came thin and forced, offered to the floor rather than to the woman standing in front of him. Danielle didn't respond. She didn't have to. The power had already moved. What had been meant as humiliation had become exposure. And nothing in this place, staff, guests, or management, would return to the way it was before. The room didn't snap back to normal. It couldn't. What had been exposed stayed visible, clinging to the space long after the noise faded. Richard stood there stripped of the confidence that had protected him all night. The accusation he'd used as a weapon now followed him instead. His account was flagged. His behavior documented. The systems that once leaned in his favor had turned cold and procedural. Whatever power he walked in with did not leave with him. Danielle didn't rush away. When she finally moved, it wasn't with relief, it was with control. Danielle Carter didn't need apologies or comfort. What mattered had already happened. The truth had been spoken publicly, and it had held. What she endured wasn't erased, but it was acknowledged. And that acknowledgement changed the weight of everything that came after. Gregory remained behind, staring at the floor longer than necessary. Gregory Miles understood what had cracked that night. Silence had failed. Containment had failed. The rules he trusted no longer protected him from consequence. Lauren didn't follow Richard. She stayed where she was, separate and quiet. Lauren Holloway had watched comfort excuse cruelty in real time, and she couldn't unsee it. Whatever came next for her would not be built on pretending nothing happened. From the kitchen doorway, Lewis finally exhaled. Louis Bernard met Danielle's eyes and nodded once. It wasn't celebration. It was respect, quiet, overdue, and earned. Later, outside under the night air, Danielle checked her phone. A message from Henry waited there, steady as always. Henry Carter didn't ask questions. He reminded her who she was and why she never bent. This wasn't a story about winning. It was about refusing to disappear. Because racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, tests boundaries, and waits for silence to do the work. And justice doesn't arrive because it's deserved. It arrives when someone stands still long enough for the truth to catch up. So when the room goes quiet, who are you willing to let the silence protect? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.